Can Ukraine defend a Russian invasion by itself? As we've been talking about on this channel a lot recently, Russia and Ukraine are not on the friendliest of terms right now. I suppose specifying and saying they aren't on the friendliest of terms right now might be a bit misleading though, because frankly, these guys have never really been on the friendliest of terms. These two countries have a deep and dark history between them that spans many generations. Considering we've talked pretty extensively about this in other videos recently, I'm not going to go too deep into it, just the Cole's Notes version. Basically, Ukraine hasn't been their own country for very long, only a bit over 30 years in fact. This is because for the longest time they were part of the Soviet Union. After World War II, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was founded and this was connected to the Soviet Union. Therefore, during this period of time, Ukraine was not an independent nation but was under control. They didn't gain their solidarity until 1991 when the Soviet Union was dissolved and a vote was held to see if the Ukrainian people wanted their independence. They definitely did, because a staggering 92.3% of the population voted to separate from Russia and become their own nation. Russia was never happy about this separation and has made it clear over the years that they believe Ukraine is an extension of Russia. An extension of Russia that they very much want back. This is part of the reason why Russia's putting a lot of pressure on the Ukrainian border right now. Ukraine has been getting closer to the possibility of joining NATO, something that would solidify their claim as a country on the world stage and give them some very powerful allies. It would also add a strong Western influence to Ukraine, which is something Russia definitely doesn't want for their next door neighbor. Russia and the United States certainly aren't on the best of terms, so having a strong United States ally right by them isn't in their best interest. So this is why we're in the situation right now where Russia has roughly 100,000 soldiers just chilling on the Ukrainian border, looking as if they could attack any day. Now, obviously, no one should want an invasion because, as many analysts have predicted, this could easily devolve into a full-on European war. Also, even if it didn't, then there would still be a ton of casualties from the Ukrainians and the Russians. But if we were to look at the worst possible scenario and say that Russia did invade Ukraine, would they be able to defend themselves? Well, before I fully delve into this question, I do want to say that they most likely wouldn't have to. NATO, the powerful alliance that Ukraine wants to become a part of, has said that it will come to Ukraine's aid if Russia attacks. The United States and Britain have been two of the most vocal in regards to their feelings about this potential invasion. Both Joe Biden and Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson have come out and warned Russia about the consequences of such an invasion, talking about how deadly it's going to be. In fact, the United States have already started mobilizing troops and moving them over to Europe. The other day, they announced that they were moving 3,000 troops to Eastern Europe. Now, even though 3,000 troops might seem like a lot, it really isn't when you consider the massive scale to Russia's army. However, that being said, 3,000 is still better than zero, so in reality, Ukraine will never need to defend its borders solely by itself. But on the off chance the United States pull all their forces back and NATO changes their mind, how would Ukraine fare against Russia? Well, short answer, not great. In a previous LBQ, I pulled this picture up of the Russian army versus the Ukrainian army, and I think now would be a good time to do that again. BBC released this image comparing the two, and as you can see, one side is definitely doing better than the other one. The difference in troops isn't horrible, like Russia definitely has an advantage here, but it isn't so overwhelming that Ukraine doesn't have a shot. What really isn't ideal for Ukraine though is how far behind they are in equipment. Russia literally has 15 times the attack aircraft that Ukraine has. They have way more tanks, way more armored vehicles, and way more artillery. At the end of the day, having troops is great, but they won't do a whole lot against the thousands of tanks that are rolling in. They also can't be that effective if there are enemy aircraft flying over top of them, dropping whatever they feel like on them. And this is sadly the reality of the situation. Most experts believe that even though the Ukrainian army has a lot of heart and a lot of fight, they would inevitably lose out because Russia would just absolutely dominate the air. Also, Russia would most likely own the Black Sea as well and dominate Ukraine in any naval battles that may take place. All of this doesn't bode well for Ukraine if they were left to fight by themselves. This is also only looking at one specific area of warfare and doesn't account for the whole other side of things. Strategy. Having the numbers in your favor is always a massive advantage, but as we've seen throughout history, a well thought out defense strategy can turn the tides of any battle. So with that being said, is it possible that Ukraine could just outmaneuver the Russians with some brilliant strategy? Well, nothing is impossible, but it's highly unlikely. In an article dedicated to this question, Mike Eckel writes, "How long could Ukraine's armed forces hold out against a bigger, more powerful military force like Russia's? Russia will find them a determined, robust, and enduring army, whatever Putin chooses to do," said Glenn Grant, a retired British Army artillery officer who served as an advisor to the Ukrainian military. The big challenge, as I see it, is not the military but the political. There is little faith in the country that the president, as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and his administration are as prepared, thoughtful, and robust as the army and population at large. Much will depend upon what sort of attack Putin decides to follow. There is no appetite in the country for political surrender. So here's the big problem with what I just read there. The man who is being quoted is a retired army officer who worked as an advisor for Ukraine's military. He would have been there, in the room, seeing how they run their operation. If this man is already coming out and saying that he doesn't have faith in the leaders to be as prepared, thoughtful, or robust, then I personally have a very hard time seeing how they're going to out-strategize the Russians. It should also be noted that those 98 attack aircraft that the Ukrainians have and other equipment isn't in the best of conditions. Mike Eckel also writes, "Much weaponry and equipment remains outdated with large numbers of old vehicles or old technology. The Air Force is a small fleet of Soviet helicopters and aging fighter jets whose effectiveness is questionable and would likely be wiped out quickly in the event of a major new Russian incursion," experts say. So the limited things that Ukraine does have access to aren't even in the best condition and are severely outdated. Also, most of it was the Russians to begin with. Basically, Ukraine is in a lot of trouble. Their defense also hangs heavily on how Russia chooses to attack them in the first place. The Center for Strategic and International Studies released a great article detailing the 3 possible invasion routes. The 3 routes, as they say, are the northern route, the central route, and the southern route. The northern route, as they write, is where Russia could advance toward Kiev along 2 routes. The first would be 150 miles by road through Novi Yurkovichy, Chernihiv, and into Kiev. The second would be a 200-mile thrust through Tobachon, Konotop, Nisiev, and into Kiev. If Minsk were to acquiesce to the use of its road and rail networks, the Russian army could outflank Ukrainian defenses around Kiev and approach them from the rear via a 150-mile axis of advance from Mazhyr, Belarus, to Korenstan, Ukraine, and finally to Kiev. The central route is where Russia could also advance due west along 3 routes. The first might include a 200-mile axis that moves through Belograde, Kharkov, Poltava, and finally to Kremenchuk. The second might include a 140-mile axis thrust through Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and possibly another thrust from Donetsk to Dnipro. The third might involve Russian forces advancing along the coastline toward Mariupol, Berdyansk, and the Perekop Isthmus, connecting Crimea to Ukraine. And the southern route is where Russia could also advance across the Perekop Isthmus to take Kherson and the source of the fresh water for Crimea, and simultaneously toward the vicinity of Melitopol to link up with Russian forces advancing along the coast of the Sea of Azov. If Russia was to attempt option 5, this would be the main attack coupled with the assault along the coastline toward Mariupol and Berdansk, but it would be the hardest to sustain logistically due to the lack of railway running along the Sea of Azov coast and the main direction of advance. So that's kind of the breakdown of some potential Russian invasion strategies, but considering Ukraine has no idea which one Russia will do, I don't know how much this is gonna help them. Ukraine is really not in a good spot here, and their best chance for success is to be as close with NATO as they possibly can be. Without their support, they will assuredly be taken over by the Russians in a matter of time. They may be able to hold out for a few weeks, maybe even a month or so, but eventually the overwhelming numbers and superior strategy will take hold, and they will lose. But please let me know in the comments down below what you think about all of this. Do you think that Ukraine actually does have a shot at defending themselves, or are they gonna need some help? Also, please hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Nicholas Playlog, and I'll catch you next time.